Hey, everybody, welcome to 2026 and another episode of You're the Cure. I'm Dr. Ben Edwards. I'm excited about this year, guys. It's going to be a big year. It's going to be an Ephesians 5:11 kind of year. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. We're going to get into some things this year, guys. Might seem not related to medical, but it's all related. Everything is intertwined, and so much is being exposed right now. I hear it every single day from people I interact with about so many things they thought were true that just ain't so. I think that was a Mark Twain quote. It's not the things you don't know that get you in trouble. It's the things you just knew were true that just weren't so. The reason I think it's important to expose these things, not only because the Word of God commands us to, is also because it directly impacts not just your mental health, but your physical health. Because your thoughts and heart beliefs, and fear in particular, absolutely impacts your physical cells, your mitochondria. We've talked about it a bunch. We'll talk about that some this year, here and there, I believe, also. But the things that have blinded us, seeing in that mirror half dimly, or to seeing through I forget, I think that's in Corinthians, like looking in a mirror dimly. But those days are over. Those are the childish ways. It says for us to go on, put the childish things aside and move on into matureness. And that's where the body of Christ is headed, to the full stature of Christ. He's already seated at the right hand of the Father. And I don't think he's going to stand up until his enemies are made a footstool. And I do believe we have a part in that as his body on the earth. And I've been asked some, what is my theology? And I'll get into that in another show. But in a one-word answer, Jesus is my theology. But today's show is not going to be about my theology so much. In a way, it is. Because this Pharmakia thing, Revelation 18:23, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by their Pharmakia were all nations deceived. I just produced a course late 2025. I think we released it, launched it December of 25, on our veritaswellnessmember.com website for our wellness members who, guys, there's, I don't know, 12, 13 years of radio shows / podcast content, tons of content on the website for free. On the wellness side, we try to curate it, try to deliver it in a very efficient and effective way. And of course, there's the one-on-one consultations you can have, the blood work you can have done through the wellness program. So that's the reason there's a charge to that. Anytime we have to give of our time with one-on-one consultations, and even the community groups, it's not one-on-one, but you can ask your questions there. But the curated content, so there's that small monthly fee. And we appreciate you members that are supporting us that way, so we can reach more people, hire more wellness navigators to help navigate and lead people to the truth. But the course, so if you want to see that course, you need to be a member. But it's the point of that course, and the name of the course was How Drugs Work. And then I'll put a subtitle or a continuation of that title, and How They Don't. But we do go through in that course exactly how a drug works, which is by blocking a receptor or blocking an enzyme or binding a receptor. For the most part, it's how all drugs work, blocking part of our physiology. So the outcomes at the end of that course, what I want to really talk about today, and guys, today it's just me flying solo. If I could interview a Midwestern doctor, I would, but he's anonymous. We'll talk about him in a minute. I'm actually going to try to read 2 of his articles. That may be impossible because they're super long. But a Midwestern doctor's just been amazing this past, really since COVID. And he went anonymous because a lot of doctors during COVID were sanctioned, deplatformed, even their license threatened. So a Midwestern doctor decided to stay anonymous. And he's just exploded. I think he has 2 million subscribers now on his Substack, which is a forgotten side of medicine. If you need data, if you need intellectual proof, go there. The one of the articles I'm going to read about the hepatitis B vaccine for infants has over 250 citations. This guy is hardcore on evidence-based. But back to the course. I ended that course talking about the way drugs work and how they don't. What are the effects of these drugs? The reductions in the bad outcomes that we're trying to do with Pharmakia. So here they are, real quick, bullet, just rapid fire. Statins for heart attacks. We decrease heart attacks using our number one preventative strategy there, statins, cholesterol drug. 1.3% reduction in heart attacks. That's JAMA, March of 22. Strokes, the best we have to offer for reduction of strokes is 0.4%, JAMA, March of 22. Complications from diabetes, which would be kidney damage leading to renal death, kidney death and dialysis, blindness, neuropathy, amputation, cardiovascular mortality, including stroke and heart attack, all-cause mortality. According to an article published in Circulation, August of 2016, tight blood sugar control with medications produces zero significant benefit in reduction of dialysis, blindness, neuropathy, cardiovascular mortality, stroke, or all-cause mortality. Drugs for Alzheimer's, average, zero improvement, very modest slowing of cognitive decline is the best we have to offer after billions, probably trillions now spent on Alzheimer's drugs. We'll get into that more in one of Midwestern doctors' articles here in a second. But basically, these drugs might slow cognitive decline to the point that you could live independently out of the nursing home for an extra 3 weeks. Osteoporosis drugs, called bisphosphonates, 0.4% reduction in hip fractures. That's Calcified Tissue International Journal, February of 22. Chemotherapy for advanced cancers, contribution to 5-year survival, 2.1%. That's Clinical Oncology, December of 04. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for depression and anxiety. That's your number one pharmaceutical for that. A 3% reduction, 3% of patients at 12 months were well. That's from Psychotherapy and Psychosomatics, August of 2010. Flu vaccine, 1.4% reduction in acquiring flu. That's Cochrane, February 2018. Childhood vaccine schedule, as it's currently listed on CDC's website. All-cause morbidity and mortality. That means health, disease burden, and death. According to 12 separate studies, I'm not going to list all here, all-cause morbidity, mortality higher in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated group. So that's just the top maybe 5 or 6 diseases in Americans, the top killers of Americans, and some of our top therapies that we use. 0 to 3% reductions in benefit, in outcomes, reducing the outcomes that we've intended to reduce, like heart attacks, the number one killer. The best we can do is a 1.3% reduction. That's Pharmakia. That's standard of care. That's what's mandated by state medical boards that doctors have to offer. So just understand that, being an informed consumer of quote unquote healthcare, I would call sick care symptom management. I hope this doesn't bore you. Read an article. I'm going to try to read almost all of it. Like I said, if a Midwestern doctor would not be anonymous, I would have him on the show and we could talk about these things, but I understand why he is anonymous. He is a board certified physician from the Midwest. Dr. Mercola says he's a longtime reader of Mercola.com. I think many of you know Dr. Mercola's website, the number one natural health website since the 1990s. And Dr. Mercola often republishes a Midwestern doctor's articles, but you can find them yourself on Substack. The Forgotten Side of Medicine. The article that I'm going to read most of real quick, well, not real quick, but we're going to get through it, was republished on Mercola's website December 4th of 2025. So it was probably on Substack, a few weeks before that. But so you can find it in either place. And the reason I've chosen this is because it's such a great example of how we've been blinded and we've just submitted to a way, a world's way, a man's way, intellectual way of doing things. And it's now pretty clear, I would say, after you read this article and the 250 citations, it's just irrefutable that the full truth was not presented to the American people. And we trust institutions. And I'll just say for myself, I did not understand about consulting the Spirit of truth to lead me into all truth. I didn't understand that fully. And I consulted worldly counsel only. And a wise man seeks much wise counsel. That's fine to seek counsel from all different sources, but I would encourage you to ultimately let the Spirit of truth guide you, which will result in peace in your heart, not fear. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try to read fast so we can get through it, because then there's a second article that's even worse, in my opinion, on Alzheimer's and 3 drugs recently approved for Alzheimer's and the corruption behind that. But here's the article on Mercola.com. Why is every newborn forced to get the dangerous hepatitis B vaccine? An analysis by a Midwestern doctor, December 4th, 2025. Since our society is conditioned to believe all vaccines are safe and effective, quote unquote, many do not realize the risk and benefits of every vaccine vary greatly. One of the most controversial vaccines has been the Hep B vaccine, hepatitis B, which is given to every newborn in the country at their most fragile moment of life, day of life 1, despite the risk of contracting hepatitis B being negligible. Bonnie Dunbar, PhD, has also been in contact with numerous physicians and research scientists from several countries who have independently described thousands of identical, severe reactions occurring in Caucasian recipients of the hepatitis vaccine. That was just a quote from an article he put into his article. It's referenced there. If you want to see that reference, go to his article. Like I said, well cited, over 250 citations. Continuing on. Since entering the market, the hepatitis B vaccine has been marred with safety concerns. As early as 1976, one researcher cautioned that since autoimmunity is involved in the pathogenesis of the hepatitis B infection, that these might also be provoked by molecular similar hepatitis B vaccines. That was just a caution early on. Hepatitis B virus can lead to autoimmune problems. So possibly the hepatitis B vaccine could too. We need to watch for that. That was my commentary. Continuing on here. Numerous papers and major news articles since have shown that vaccine provokes a wide range of autoimmune disorders. In 1998, scientists highlighted growing concerns threatening to derail the hepatitis B vaccine program, such as more and more people claiming it caused serious autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, optic neuritis, and multiple sclerosis. That one doctor had collected over 600 cases of this happening, and that in July, attorneys representing 15,000 people sued France's government for exaggerating the vaccine's benefits and downplaying its risk, after which France suspended the vaccine in schools, a move widely condemned by health authorities. In January 1999, ABC News aired a scathing criticism of hepatitis B vaccine, and he has embedded that. You can watch that clip in his article. 55 other news programs criticizing vaccines they would never air today can be read here, and there's a hyperlink to that. A May 1999 congressional hearing on the vaccine highlighted that serious side effects included infant death, seizures, autism, dysautonomia, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, and rare cases of liver cancer in children post-vaccination. With vastly underreported VAERS data showing over 8,000 reactions, including 43 deaths in children under 2 in 1997 alone. In contrast, there were only 95 annual hepatitis B cases and no infant deaths. I'm going to repeat that. 43 deaths in children under 2 in 1997. In contrast, there were only 95 annual hepatitis B cases and no infant deaths, indicating the risk of newborn vaccination vastly outweighed any possible benefit. There was massive underreporting of injuries. 4 to 5 day trials were too short to identify the injuries, and physicians denied they'd occurred when parents reported them. Again, all this is cited. And no effort had been made to identify injury susceptibility. All long-term research into the safety of the vaccine has been stonewalled, yet the medical community argued that the lack of robust long-term safety studies actually proved the vaccines were safe, but did promise to do further research to determine if the vaccines were safe, which 25 years later still has not happened, but again was repeatedly promised this year as a way to dismiss proposals to stop giving the vaccine to newborns. Vaccinating low-risk newborns for an adult disease is inappropriate, particularly since immunity can wane before adolescence, and 10 to 30% of individuals fail to produce antibodies, questioning efficacy. The National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program denied most claims, leaving debilitated victims unsupported despite a $1 billion trust fund for these victims being available. With restrictions limiting filings for hepatitis B vaccines injuries, there was no informed consent as parents were not provided with information on the vaccine's risks. Newborns were vaccinated without parental consent, and parents faced coercion, including threats of social service intervention if they did not vaccinate. And then he embedded a number of testimonials and comments from some Twitter page regarding some of what I just read. Many testimonials are embedded in this article. You can go watch these from the 1990s. Moving on in the article, vaccine and autoimmune disorders. One of the congressional witnesses produced a report highlighting the dangers of hepatitis B vaccine, including cases of encephalomyelitis, he'd observed, resulting in a 2-week coma for one child, a 4-week coma for another child, along with optic neuritis and significant neurological disability for both. He and others ultimately identified hundreds of publications linking that vaccine to a wide degree of autoimmune disorders. A Midwestern doctor goes on to list, I don't know, I haven't counted, maybe a dozen, more than a dozen autoimmune disorders with the citations: multiple sclerosis, myelitis, encephalitis, encephalomyelitis, optic neuritis, Guillain-Barré, neuropathy, myopathy, myasthenia gravis, uveitis, arthritis, lupus, juvenile dermatomyositis, macrophagic myofasciitis. I don't think I've ever even heard of that one. Polyarthralgia, myalgia, Still's disease, vasculitis, Churg-Strauss disease, Henoch-Cholin purpura, Kawasaki's disease, polyarthritis nodosa, hemolytic anemia, thrombocytopenia, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, lichen planus, lichen striatus, bullous pemphigoid, erythema multiforme, erythema nodosum, alopecia, buccal aphthosis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, Graves' disease, Sjogren's syndrome, hepatitis itself, glomerular nephritis, pancreatitis, and pneumonitis. Again, each one of these with multiple references. The lichen planus has 18 references. The multiple sclerosis has 13 references. There's more footnotes in here almost than there are words. It's amazing. Author's note: this vaccine has also been linked to a variety of other disorders not classically classified as autoimmune, such as seizures, Bell's palsy, cerebral ataxia, tic disorders, anorexia, tufted angioma, and to increase common childhood illnesses. i.e., one study that found a 1.6 time increase in acute ear infections, a 1.41 time increase in pharyngitis and nasopharyngitis. All that's cited, guys, if you want to go see the citations. Worse still, one study found an 81% increase in death, sudden infant death syndrome. America's number one, by far leading the pack in babies suddenly dying. And there's much evidence linking it to vaccines. That's another story. He doesn't get into that here. Let me continue in the article. Molecular mimicry. If an immune provoking substance, like an infection or an antigen, like yeast protein, mercury, aluminum, overlaps with human tissue, it can cause the immune system to target the human tissue and hence cause autoimmunity. From the start, many believed that the hepatitis B vaccine issues resulted from it overlapping with myelin. This is the insulation, the coating around our nerves. This is super important, guys. It's going to get a little deep here, but just remember that right there. Many believe that the hepatitis vaccine issues resulted from overlapping autoimmunity with myelin. This link was vociferously denied by the medical community, yet never researched. But in 2005, proven by a study which showed until the hepatitis B vaccine had a significant overlap with myelin and that 60% of its recipients also developed immune reactivity to the myelin coating their nerves, which in the majority of cases persisted for over 6 months. Citation number 206, if you want to go read that study. Furthermore, a 2005 VAERS study found the hepatitis B vaccine in adults compared to a tetanus vaccine, mind you, not compared to a placebo, was more likely to be followed by a variety of autoimmune disorders, including a 5.2-fold increase for multiple sclerosis, 18-time increase for rheumatoid arthritis, 14-fold for optic neuritis, 9.1x for lupus, 7.2 times for alopecia, 2.6 times for vasculitis, 2.3 times for thrombocytopenia. Citation number 207. A similar 2002 study found a 6.1x increase for chronic arthritis persisting for at least 1 year, which affected women 3.5 times more than men. On an average, occurred 16 days after vaccination. Citation number 208. A 2002 study found individuals who received Hep B vaccine within the next 2 months were 1.8 times as likely to experience a demyelinating event. A 2015 study found cases of multiple sclerosis, which is a demyelinating disease, guys. Found cases of multiple sclerosis in France rose by 65% in the years following an aggressive national campaign to increase hepatitis B vaccine rates, and that a statistically significant correlation existed between the number of hepatitis B vaccine doses given and the number of MS cases 1 to 2 years later. Citation number 210. A 2004 study compared 163 multiple sclerosis patients with 1,604 randomly selected matched controls without MS. It found that MS patients were 3 times more likely to have received the Hep B vaccine within 3 years of symptom onset, which was not seen from tetanus or influenza vaccine. Citation 211. A 2009 study in children found that GlaxoSmithKline's Hep B vaccine, which contains 5 times more yeast protein antigen than other brands, was associated with a 2.77x increased risk of developing multiple sclerosis. A smaller increase, 1.5x, was observed for other CNS and central nervous system inflammatory demyelinating disorders. The hepatitis B vaccine has also been repeatedly linked to autism and other developmental disabilities. Secretary Kennedy revealed that in 1999, the CDC conducted a study which found that receiving a Hep B vaccine in the first 30 days of life caused a 12.35 time increase in autism, after which the study was buried. Citation 213. Author's note, Kennedy likely referred to this unpublished study, which, via the CDC's private database, found the highest doses of mercury containing vaccine caused a 1.8x increase in neurologic development disorders, a 7.6x increase in autism, a 5.0x increase in non-organic sleep disorders, and a 2.1x increase in non-organic sleep disorders. A 2007 study of 1,824 children found boys who received the hepatitis B vaccine were 9 times as likely to have a developmental disability. A follow-up 2010 study found giving the hepatitis B vaccine at birth increased autism 3x, while a 2017 study found newborn mercury-containing hepatitis B vaccines increased the risk of autism by 6.7x. Authors note a 2015 study found the increased risk of developmental delays by 1.6x to 1.7x, which was estimated to equate to over $1 trillion in healthcare cost. Citation 219. Similar results were also seen in animals. A 2010 monkey study determined that the vaccine caused a significant delay in the acquisition of root, snout, and suck reflexes, critical processes for development. A 2016 mouse study found the vaccine impaired neurogenesis, behavioral performance, and hippocampal long-term potentiation, which simultaneously increased brain inflammation, which was proportional to the neurologic damage which occurred, later determined to largely result from elevated interleukin-4. Authors note a 2013 study found that hepatitis B vaccine spiked the inflammatory CRP levels, and in 22 out of 70 infants, this increase was large enough to pass the diagnostic threshold for sepsis. That is significant inflammation, guys. In contrast, the licensing studies for the vaccines, these are the studies the FDA looked at to give authority to this vaccine to be injected into babies. The licensing studies for the vaccines only monitored for side effects during a short window long before these side effects would emerge. Typically, the window was 4 to 5 days. Citation number 224. And did not use actual placebos. Citation 225 and 226. The limited data showed a number of different reactions. I'm not going to go through all those because I'm going to speed up and save some time. Authors note a definitive 1994 report by the Institute of Medicine noted that while preliminary data existed for many of the injuries attributed to the hepatitis B vaccine, no further research had ever been done and still has not been done to this day. So there was insufficient evidence to prove or disprove a link between these conditions. Remarkably, that was taken as proof the vaccine did not cause harm, rather than of gross failure by the scientific community. A gross failure by the scientific community. This next section of the articles, guys, is entitled Vaccine Justifications. Assessing the benefit of a vaccine is quite challenging, as a number of things have to line up for a proposed benefit. Proposed, presumed, assumed, theorized, hypothesized, guessing, hoping. A number of things have to line up for proposed benefit to occur. And since this rarely occurs in practice, a variety of overly optimistic assumptions are used to justify the vaccine, while conversely, every possible rationalization is used to downplay any possible vaccine injury. He goes on to list some of these justifications and who's actually at risk for hepatitis, which obviously would be a mother who has hepatitis. That would make the baby at risk for getting hepatitis. Pretty much every state, I believe, mandates legally that every mother has to be screened for hepatitis infection. Therefore, if they're screened negative, then there's minimal to no risk. because the other risk would be to get hepatitis would be blood contamination, and typically that's from a needle, can be from intercourse also. So after he goes through all that, I'm just jumping a little bit. These numbers, which I took from official sources, are important because when you multiply them out, you need to vaccinate over 1 million children to prevent one case of consequential hepatitis B and 5 million children to prevent one case of severe complication hepatitis. Demonstrating the vaccine injures far more children than it protects. Risk versus benefit, guys. Informed consent. Furthermore, societal data shows that the hepatitis B vaccine campaign greatly lowered acute hepatitis B in high-risk groups, but also that this decline preceded infant vaccination, and it matched the decline that occurred with hepatitis C, which never had a vaccine. So very similar to all the other childhood illnesses that were declining prior to vaccinations coming on. I'm going to skip down a little bit. He shows a lot of graphs about that decline in hepatitis B. Why is the vaccine given? As the official reason, preventing maternal to fetal transmission doesn't justify vaccinating every infant. That's just obvious, common sense. If the mom doesn't have hepatitis, why would you vaccinate an infant, every single infant, and mandate it on day of life 1? That's what he's getting into in this next section. So, as the official reason doesn't justify vaccinating every infant, I've searched for decades for the actual justification for this policy. The most compelling ones, many of which came from insiders, include bullet point number 1. Since the target demographic for the Hep B vaccine is small, universal vaccination was needed to increase sales to a profitable and sustainable level. There weren't enough customers because there weren't enough moms, pregnant mothers with hepatitis, so it needed to increase the customer base. Continuing on. Vietnam has amongst the highest rates of hepatitis B in the world, 10% in urban areas and up to 40% in rural areas. Once a large flood of refugees came here after the war, roughly doubling in both the 1980s and 1990s to 988,000 immigrants by 2000. It caused a relative explosion in neonatal transmission here in the United States, where authorities felt it needed to be addressed by vaccinating every American infant. Next reason, vaccine manufacturers only have legal immunity if their vaccine is on the childhood vaccine schedule. Next reason, vaccinating the newborn in the hospital conditions parents to come in for their 2-month vaccine appointment and hence be compliant patients who routinely acquire medical goods and services. And if their child begins life neurologically injured, the parents are less able to recognize subsequent injuries in the child. Since injuries from newborn vaccines will occur before parents have clear sense of what is normal for their child, it makes it much harder for them to recognize the subtle harms that frequently occur following vaccination, again, making it easier to increase patient compliance. And then a vetted reader sent this to him, author's note, after the 1991 vote. A close colleague of the ACIP, the committee that recommends vaccines for children, explained to me in confidence that they added the Hep B vaccine not to prevent vertical transmission, mother to child, but to get the vaccine administered to a, quote, captive audience, end quote, before they could leave the hospital. Their fear was that it would be the only opportunity to prevent hepatitis B infection later in life to the highest risk inner city youth populations, the primary source of Hep B transmission. End quote from the source. Going back to Midwestern Doctor's article. Of these, I believe the final one is the most probable, particularly since the medical industry will still force mothers who do not have hepatitis B to vaccinate their child, but it is likely some of the other reasons played a role as well. Conclusion. When the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act was passed, one of its primary purposes was to ensure safer vaccines would be created. However, since direct liability was removed and every provision to produce safer vaccines was placed in the discretion of the government, which, by the way, was also made financially liable for compensating vaccine injuries, this eliminated all incentive to create safer vaccines or even acknowledge there was a problem to begin with. Books could be written on the consequences of it. Imagine for a moment how much suffering could have been avoided if the industry had simply been pressured to develop a hepatitis vaccine that did not overlap with human myelin. For years, they've told us there's no evidence that hepatitis B vaccine, despite the fact I've cited hundreds of studies in this article showing it's anything but safe. Fortunately, decades of suppression and gaslighting can no longer maintain the status quo, and there is now strong pressure to change it. Today, the most pivotal moment in the history of this vaccine will occur, and the American Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, which creates the CDC's vaccine guidelines, will meet, and for the first time, independent members will assess if this vaccine should actually be given to every single newborn in America. Due to the vested interest behind the vaccine, the pushback against changing the policy has been immense, but I believe if we speak out and bring attention to this travesty, we can create vital public support for ACIP to rescind every newborn getting this vaccine. Please consider sharing this article. And of course, guys, this did happen. ACIP did come out and recommend that hepatitis B vaccine not be given routinely to every American child on day of life 1. Final author's note. This is an abridged version. What I just read you guys was kind of a summary, abridged version. I'm telling you, Midwestern Doctor is intense. He's got to use AI to write these. But either way, great articles, highly cited. Back to the author's note. This is an abridged version of a longer article which details the atrocious history of the Hep B vaccine and can be read here with the hyperlink. Additionally, a companion article on the pros and cons of each individual childhood vaccine can be read here, hyperlink. Finally, an article providing the extensive evidence vaccines cause a wide range of subtle and severe complications, making chronic illness 3 to 10 times more likely, can be read here, hyperlink. All right. That's it, guys. A Midwestern doctor, board-certified physician from the Midwest who remains anonymous so that he wasn't deplatformed or attacked or his medical license come under question. Started producing articles during COVID, and he has a number of excellent articles. I just highlighted this one because it was just so egregious. These are babies, newborns, day of life 1, the most vulnerable, the blood-brain barriers not developed till day of life 8. It never made sense, but I never even questioned it. Never questioned it. We have 6 kids. And before I knew any of this, I just blindly submitted to the spirit of Pharmakia. And we shouldn't do that. And that last line I just read, chronic illness 3 to 10x more likely. There are root causes to the chronic disease epidemic that we're seeing, guys, in this country. Multiple. And it's almost always, I would say, a combination of lots of different factors. Very, very vulnerable population of nutrient-depleted children being born to standard American moms who are highly inflamed and highly malnourished. We have plenty of calories, but highly deficient of nutrients. Nutrition is void in our food-like substances, I should say. Okay, let's move on to the Alzheimer's article real quick. All right, guys, remember, it's an Ephesians 5:11 kind of year. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. We're going to expose a lot of things this year on the podcast, some seemingly unrelated to medicine, but it's all related, guys, because there's only the way that leads to life. The way. All right. The great Alzheimer's scam and the proven cures they've buried for billions. An analysis by a Midwestern doctor, republished on Mercola October 31st, 2025. Medicine is strongly biased towards adopting biochemical models of disease as this facilitates costly therapeutics being developed for each disease. Let me reread that. Medicine, United States, Western conventional allopathic medicine that became the standard after the Flexner Report in 1910. Prior to that, there was homeopathic medicine, 23 homeopathic medical schools, 10,000 herbalists, naturopathic, traditional Chinese, Ayurvedic, all kinds of healing arts. That's my commentary. But current standard of care, mandated by law, allopathic, pharmakia medicine is strongly biased towards adopting biochemical models of disease, as this facilitates costly therapeutics being developed for each disease and hence sustains the medical industry. Unfortunately, in many cases, a biochemical approach to disease at best can manage symptoms, manage asthma, manage high blood pressure, manage cholesterol, manage everything. That's my commentary. And we saw the outcomes of that management with statins: 0.4% reduction in stroke, 1.3% reduction in heart attack. I'm not going to repeat all that, but back to the article. Unfortunately, in many cases, the biochemical approach to disease at best can manage symptoms, and as a result, many conditions remained quote unquote incurable, while non-patentable natural therapies that can cure them languish in obscurity. That's why, despite spending an ever-increasing amount of money on Alzheimer's research, $2.9 billion in 2020, $3.9 billion with a B in 2024, we've still failed to make any real progress on this disease. This is particularly remarkable given the vast cost to the country. For example, last year, Alzheimer's was estimated to cost the United States $360 billion. And the even greater social costs that accompany. The amyloid juggernaut. In 1906, plaques of amyloid, that's just this kind of fatty protein mixture, plaque, were found in the brain on autopsy, identified as the cause of Alzheimer's. That's 1906. Autopsy reports found this plaque in the brain, and they declared that's the cause of Alzheimer's. Okay. As the years have gone by, the majority of research for treating Alzheimer's disease has been targeted at eliminating amyloid plaque. Unfortunately, to quote a 2022 article, quote, hundreds of clinical trials of amyloid-targeted therapies have yielded few glimmers of promise. However, only the underwhelming Aduhelm, which is a drug, has gained FDA approval. Yet amyloid beta still dominates research and drug development. NIH spent about $1.6 billion on projects that mention amyloid in this fiscal year, and about half of its overall Alzheimer's funding is for amyloid. Scientists who advance other potential Alzheimer causes other than amyloid, such as immune dysfunction or inflammation, complain they have been sidelined by the, quote, amyloid mafia. Forsyth says, that's a person that they're quoting, says the amyloid hypothesis became, quote, the scientific equivalent of the Ptolemaic model for the solar system in which the sun and planets rotate around the earth. We have to get into that in a future episode. Author's note, frequently, when a faulty paradigm fails to explain the disease it claims to address, rather than admit the paradigm as flawed, its adherents will label each conflicting piece of evidence as a paradox, i.e., the French paradox disproves the notion cholesterol causes heart disease. Remember, the French have more fat, saturated fat in the diet than anybody, but the least amount of heart disease. So we just call it the French paradox. We don't dig into, well, maybe our theory on cholesterol and fat, saturated fat is wrong. Back to the article. But wait a minute. Let me just reread that sentence. Frequently, when a faulty paradigm fails to explain the disease it claims to address, rather than admit the paradigm is flawed, its adherents will label each conflicting piece of evidence as a paradox and dig deeper and deeper until they can find something to continue propping up their ideology. The consistent failure of the amyloid model to cure Alzheimer's gradually invited increasing skepticism towards it, which resulted in more and more scientists studying alternative models of disease. Before long, they found other factors played a far more significant role in causing disease, i.e., chronic inflammation. And by 2006, this perspective appeared to be poised to change the direction of Alzheimer's research. 20 years ago, guys, 2006. The researchers, enough researchers were saying the amyloid thing doesn't pan out. We're wrong. We think this theory is wrong. Let's shift over here to inflammation. 20 years ago, they were trying to shift to inflammation. Okay, back to the article. In response, the amyloid proponents pivoted to defending their failed hypothesis was due to amyloid clumps. Not amyloid plaques, amyloid clumps. Oh, excuse me, I just misread that. In response, the amyloid proponents pivoted to defending their failed hypothesis was due not to amyloid plaques, but rather toxic parts or oligomers of the amyloid, just certain toxic parts. And a Nature 2006 paper appeared which identified previously unknown toxic parts of the amyloid plaque, amyloid beta 56, and provided proof that it caused dementia in rats. The paper cemented both the amyloid beta and toxic portion of the amyloid hypothesis, as it provided proof many of the adherents to the theory had been waiting for. So in 2006, when everyone's about to move over to inflammation as the cause of Alzheimer's, they come up with this more toxic part of the amyloid beta plaque to keep this theory going. This 2006 paper in Nature, in the journal Nature, came out to do this. It rapidly became one of the most cited works in the field of Alzheimer's research. Its authors rose to academic stardom, produced further papers validating their initial hypothesis, and billions more were invested by both the NIH and pharmaceutical industry into research of the amyloid and toxic oligomer hypothesis. It should be noted that some were skeptical of their findings and likewise were unable to replicate this data. So this huge paper comes out in 2006 in Nature. The authors rise to stardom, get billions of dollars of funding, and here we go, continue with the amyloid theory. But there were some skeptics. They weren't able to replicate this landmark 2006 study, but rarely had a voice in the debate. And he quotes from an article about this. Quote, the spotty evidence that amyloid beta 56 toxic oligomer plays a role in Alzheimer's had raised eyebrows. Wilcock has long doubted studies that claim to use purified amyloid beta 56 toxic oligomer. Such oligomers are notoriously unstable, converting to subtypes spontaneously. Multiple types can be present in a sample even after purification efforts, making it hard to say any cognitive effects are due to amyloid beta 56 toxic particle alone. In fact, Wilcock and others say several labs have tried and failed to find this amyloid beta 56 toxic particle, although few have published these findings. Journals are often uninterested in negative results, and researchers can be reluctant to contradict a famous investigator. It's just high school drama at the highest levels, guys. I'm telling you. These politicians and government institutions, it's the same deceptive spirits, man-pleasing, performance, orphan spirit, money, money, money. Anyways, let me continue here. The amyloid scandal. At the end of 2021, a neuroscientist physician was hired by investors to evaluate an experimental Alzheimer's drug and discovered signs that its data consisted of doctored Western blots. And as he explored the topic further, he discovered other papers within the Alzheimer's literature had also been flagged for containing doctored Western blots. Before long, the neuroscientist noticed 3 of those suspect papers had been published by the same author, and he decided to investigate this author's other publications. This led him to the 2006 landmark study published in the Journal of Nature, which contained clear signs of fraud. Citation number 9. As investigation then uncovered 20 doctored papers written by the same author, 10 of which pertain to this toxic amyloid beta 56 particle. The amyloid industry. One of the remarkable things about this monumental fraud was how little was done about it. For example, the NIH was notified in January of 22 of this fraud. Yet 5 months later, May of 22, beyond nothing had been done. The NIH gave the suspect researcher a coveted $764,792 research grant signed off by another one of the authors of the fraudulent paper. In July of that year, Science, the journal Science, published an article exposing the incident and the clear fraud that had occurred. Despite this, the researcher was allowed to remain in his position as a tenured medical school professor. It was not until June of 24, 2 years later, that this 2006 article was retracted at the request of the authors, all of whom denied being at fault and insisted the doctored images had not affected the article's conclusions. Eventually, by January of the next year, January 29th of 2025, during his confirmation hearing, RFK cited the paper as an example of the institutional fraud and wasted tax dollars within the NIH. And a few days later, the suspect researcher announced his resignation from the medical school professorship while still maintaining his innocence. This odd behavior, i.e., the medical field continues to insist the proven fraud has not disproven the amyloid theory, likely results from how much money is at stake. Beyond the research dollars, roughly 7 million adults have Alzheimer's, equating to hundreds of billions in potential Medicare-funded sales each year. Next section, the failed amyloid drugs. Recently, a monoclonal antibody drug that made immune cells target the amyloid plaque demonstrated limited success in treating Alzheimer's. This drug was embraced as revolutionary by the medical community, the pharmaceutical industry, and the drug regulators. In turn, the first new drug received accelerated approval. The FDA proudly announced this accelerated approval of this Alzheimer's drug, by the way. The second drug then received a quiet backdoor approval. And the third drug was partially approved a year and a half later. Citation number 18. Each year, JP Morgan Chase Bank hosts a private conference for pharmaceutical investors that sets the tone for the entire industry. In 2023, its focus, covered in detail here, hyperlink, was on the incredible profitability of the new Alzheimer's drugs and the GLP-1s like Ozempic. Most remarkably, the FDA commissioner was a keynote speaker at this JP Morgan Chase Bank investor conference. And a few days before the conference, the FDA commissioner had enacted the second backdoor approval. However, Despite the rosy picture painted around these drugs, which these drugs attack different aspects of the amyloid. These drugs are highly controversial, as the following bullet points note. The FDA's independent advisory panel, in a very unusual move, voted 10-0 against approving the first drug, but the FDA approved it anyways. In a highly unprecedented move, 3 of the advisors resigned, calling it, quote, probably the worst drug approval decision in recent U.S. history. Citation number 19. That drug was priced at $56,000 a year, making it sufficient to bankrupt Medicare, which this did attract congressional investigation. Brain swelling or brain bleeding was found in 41% of patients enrolled in the study. Additionally, headaches, including migraines and occipital neuralgia, falls, diarrhea, confusion, and delirium were also notably elevated compared to placebo. No improvement in Alzheimer's was noted. Let me repeat those 2 bullet points. Brain swelling or brain bleeding was found in 41% of patients enrolled in studies. No improvement in Alzheimer's was noted. The FDA's independent advisory board voted 10-0 against it, yet it was approved at $56,000 a year, with brain bleeding in 41% of recipients compared to placebo, and no improvement in Alzheimer's was noted. Just let that sink in for a minute, guys. Hard to believe this is true, but highly cited article. Go find and read all the citations if you need the proof. The second monoclonal antibody, which targeted amyloid precursors, had a somewhat better risk benefit. Only 21% experienced brain bleeding and swelling due to reduced targeting of the amyloid plaques. And 26.4% reduction in the progression of Alzheimer's was detected in one trial, which, for context, that translates to a reduction of 1 point on a cognitive mental test, but in which has no meaningful impact on the patient's quality of life, i.e., staying out of the nursing home for 3 extra weeks is the most Alzheimer's drugs have ever been shown to do. The third monoclonal drug was also contested, as it caused 36.8% of recipients to develop brain bleeding or swelling, just like the other amyloid medications. It frequently caused headaches, infusion reactions, nausea, vomiting, changes in blood pressure, hypersensitive reaction, anaphylaxis, and there were reasons to suspect the trial had greatly overstated the minimal benefit. Remarkably, despite widespread protests against the third drug, the FDA new advisory panel voted unanimously in favor of it, even though it had very similar mechanisms, efficacy, and toxicity to the previously unanimously rejected amyloid drug. It should therefore come as no surprise that when the British Medical Journal conducted an independent investigation, it found that within publicly available databases, 9 out of 9 members of the advisory committee had significant financial conflicts of interest. Citation number 24. Fortunately, despite the aggressive promotion of the amyloid drugs and the industry's best attempts to promote this sector, the market somewhat recognized how bad they were. The first drug had its price slashed in half, while the other 2 have had very modest sales. We're running out of time, guys. I think you got the point on this article, but it does go on to talk about what amyloid drugs show us, and I'll just summarize real quick. Amyloid beta plaque is a defensive protective mechanism laid down by the body in a last-ditch protective effort. It's like trying to shore up the walls of the Alamo with some stucco patchwork where the cannonballs have been ripping through it. The brain's trying to wall off these inflammatory damaged spots. They're damaged by inflammation. So that inflammation theory that was gaining some ground way back 20 years ago in 2006 that got squashed was actually true. And this amyloid beta plaque is the body putting plaque, laying down, some stucco plaster to patch up these damaged spots in the brain. That's what the plaque is doing. And that's why the monoclonal antibody drugs, which tell the immune system to go target and attack that plaque, and it does. The white blood cells run in there and just start chewing up that plaque and rip it apart, attack the plaque. So, boom, your patchwork is undone and you start leaking. Brain bleeds, swelling's edema, water. So the brain is just swelling with blood and fluid because we're removing all the patches. It's like you ran over a bunch of your kid's bicycle tube, ran through the pasture, got full of stickers, all these little holes, and you patched it all up. These amyloid beta plaque monoclonal antibody drugs go in there and rip those patches off. So that's what he goes on to talk about in this article. And then you kind of have to see this graph. It's incredible. On the x-axis versus y-axis change in cognitive score. X-axis is all the different drugs versus placebo. No treatment at all versus the drugs. And everything is negative. Everything's below the x-axis. There is no improvement with any of these. No treatment or the drugs. None. Zero. A mild, slow and cognitive decline, barely, but for all that risk of brain bleed. But there's one bar going north, positive, up that y-axis. One. And it's called RECODE. That's an acronym for Dr. Del Bredesen's protocol that does address root causes of the inflammation that's damaging the brain, that's causing the body to try to repair itself with this amyloid plaque. The actual cause of the inflammation is addressed by the RECODE protocol. You can go read Dr. Del Bredesen's book, The End of Alzheimer's. Maybe we'll have Dr. Del on in the future. But the article just goes on to talk about the RECODE protocol is the only peer-reviewed published therapy that shows positive benefit and some reversal of cognitive decline and improved outcomes on quality of life and ability to stay at home longer. He does go on to talk about DMSO, a natural therapeutic for dementia, tons of citations, tons of peer-reviewed literature on DMSO. And then he has a conclusion. So I'm out of time, can't read the rest of that, but I encourage you to go to the Forgotten Side of Medicine on Substack, subscribe to that. Like I said, he's got over 2 million subscribers. He just launched this during COVID to shed the light of truth during the whole COVID fiasco. And he has a lot of different topics on there, not just Alzheimer's and vaccines and COVID, a number of topics. He's done a lot of work with the DMSO therapeutic, so I highly encourage you to look at that. DMSO is an incredible natural therapy. Lots and lots of published studies, but it completely was buried over the years. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that show. I'm sorry, Midwestern Doctors Anonymous, and you couldn't see his face and talk to him. It probably would have been more interesting than me reading this article. But the point of today's show, guys, is just to highlight the fact that the pharmaceutical-based approach that we've been under for the past 120, 110 years since the Flexner report came out and shifted modern Western medicine to pharmaceutical symptom management, blocking receptors, blocking enzymes. Those are the two main mechanisms of how pharmaceuticals work. That's what the course is about, how drugs work and how they don't. Goes through these mechanisms, goes through the outcomes. What do these drugs get us? I read those stats at the beginning of the show on percent reductions. 0 to 3% is where we're at. And then the unintended consequences. At the end of that class, I talk about, it is kind of more on the lighter side, kind of funny. Somebody noticed that when doctors went on strike, certain countries, doctors would go on strike for a number of weeks or months. So someone decided to go look at mortality rates. Mortality rates drop consistently every time doctors go on strike. Kind of funny. And I'm not saying doctors don't do any good, but overall, big picture, you look at risk benefit, unintended consequences. We're trying our hardest. We're doing our best, but it's all rooted in a flawed theory called Darwinian evolution. We're not evolved out of nothing into pond scum into us. It takes more faith to believe that than it does to believe there's a God who loves you and created you with a purpose. And there is a purpose. God Most High. In a future show, we're going to talk about the little g gods, the divine council. Turns out God wants to work in community, in family. He wants to talk to other beings and have input and have them go carry out his marching orders, and gives them the authority to do it, actually gives them dominion and instruction. That's his plan. That's his way. That's his amazing. And this God is a loving God. And he loves us so much, he lets us choose whether to love him or not love him. Voluntary submission is an absolute essential foundational principle in the kingdom of God. There's only two kingdoms, guys. It's kingdom versus empire. There's one kingdom rooted in love and truth and light, and love your neighbor more than yourself. The other kingdom is self-centeredness, self-preservation, self-promotion. I'm only going to be at peace when my bank account is so full, or enough likes and thumbs up and people give me approval. This other empire kingdom uses fear to drive you into it. And self-centeredness keeps us separated. So we're going to expose a lot of these schemes of the enemy, expose the darkness, bring light into lots of different nooks and crannies that were called conspiracy theories. And ultimately, my goal this year is for you to get closer to your Creator who loves you, laid down his life for you. And he's good. He's always good. Every single time he's good. And all the bad stuff that gets blamed on him, we're going to expose a lot of that. And we're going to expose a lot of the false idols and tear them down. We're putting our hope, trust, and faith in different things. And there can be a lot of good people in these different things, in institutions and politics and all the things. But it's going to fail us every time. There's only the way that leads to joy, peace, true peace, and leads to life. And it's awesome. Super awesome. It's been inaccurately represented, that kingdom, that Creator, God Most High. A lot of people get tricked and deceived into that other kingdom. So, looking forward to this year. Not sure what next week's show will be yet. I've already recorded a bunch, but I'm trying to think of the best way to connect the dots. And guys, a lot of these shows could be, well, they're going to be thought-provoking, but they could be offense-provoking too. And that's not my intent. I love all groups, all people. I don't care what label you fall under. The actual people in all the different groups, no problem at all. It's the leaders, especially the ones who are behind the scenes, and they're corrupt, and they don't have your best intentions at heart. So I'm going to try to walk through this year in humbleness and not talk down or condescendingly or act like I know it all, because I definitely don't. But there are some clear, absolutely clear things that have to be discussed, because deception has kept people in fear and anxiety and submitted to some things that are not going to lead to life. So, all right, got to wrap it up, guys. Welcome to 2026. It's going to be a great year. We'll see you next week with another show. I'm Dr. Ben Edwards. You're the cure. Bye-bye.